Welcome to this session, which is actually the key session when it comes to this conference, because it has the same name like the whole conference, Revitalizing Democracy to Participatory Democratic Innovations. Yesterday we had a lot of discussions, and from my point of view, and I hope that you share the feeling, it was really interesting, and we highlighted some ups and downs of the approach of participation or participatory innovations. And today we are going to continue in the same critical manner. So today I'm happy to greet with us Roger Berkowitz, who is coming from Hannah Arendt Center at Bard College. Then Giovanni Allegretti, who is coming from University of Coimbra at Portugal. And Stefania Ravazzi, who is coming from University of Turin Department for Cultures, Politics and Society at University of Turin. I'm sorry to announce that Tami Pogrebinski couldn't join us today. All those who have young kids know that you can get a lot of things from the kids, so she got stomach fever. And unfortunately, she was not able to join us today, but she sends her greetings, and we are very sorry that her input was not, it was not be able to be included today, because her input would also be very valuable to the discussion. I wouldn't take so long with introduction. The topic as itself is a topic which gives us a hope that we can do something about democracy in our countries. And when I say hope and democracy, I also mean not only those countries like Serbia, which are facing captured institutions, which we name competitive authoritarian countries or hybrid regime. I also think on those established, embedded, or whatever you would like to call them, democracies. There are many challenges, and there is a rising tendency that citizens withdraw from political life. In Serbia, probably that was the most expressed through the disgust which citizens have towards political life and politicians in general. But it's up to us who are theorizing and who are empirically researching democracy and its different aspects to see and maybe to offer some pathways which can help us to understand, but also can help those who are more actively engaged in the political life to see where they could go. Because for the moment, we have a feeling that we are stuck somewhere and we are searching for a path which can help us to see how to preserve and empower our democracy and empower our citizens. When saying that, we need always to think somehow what is the horizon and what is the theoretical position behind such attempts. And I think that Roger, who is today with us, he worked a lot on this, and he could give us a little bit more overview on the open democracy and also on civic republicanism, which is a tradition very known to some in this institute also, but maybe the one who can give us some horizons where maybe we could focus our endeavors in the future. So, Roger.
Wonderful. First of all, thank you, Gatsela, for inviting me, and Elena, and it's a pleasure to be here. It's my first time in Serbia, let alone Belgrade, so really happy to be here. So I've been very engaged in this idea of using citizen assemblies or sortition or participatory democracy or participatory polling, however you talk about it, now for a number of years. And there's sort of a couple different ways that I've begun to approach it that I thought would be helpful to talk about. One is that you hear it often talked about as democracy, and in many ways I think that's a misnomer. I don't think a lot of this is about democracy. You know, you have to also remember I come from the United States, which was founded explicitly against being a democracy, despite what people say today. The United States, the founders were very afraid of democracy. And they imagined themselves really as a republic, civic republican tradition, as a republican form of government. So in our Constitution, it says that every state has a right to the republican form of government, not to a democratic form of government. And I think that's a distinction that is lost on many people today in the United States, and maybe some people here don't even know that we were not formed as a democracy, but formed as a republican. And so I want to maybe say a little bit about what the difference is and why I think thinking about citizen assemblies as part of a Republican tradition, small r, not the Republican Party, but small r Republican tradition is more helpful than thinking about it as a democratic process. The founders were very worried about democracy. They thought democracy led to mob rule. They thought democracy led to what Tocqueville would call a tyranny of the majority. And they wanted the country to be ruled by the people, but by the people in a responsible way. And much of this tradition came out of the U.S. tradition of town hall meetings in the Northeast. But in Hungary, you had the workers' councils during the 1956 revolution. But around the world, the Soviets actually in the Soviet Union, the idea that sort of local councils would rule. But it wasn't just anybody, right? It was, the way it works is you would have a local council, and in that local council, someone would rise up, and then they would go to a bigger council, and they would rise up. And you, instead of top down, you have the bottom up. But you have citizen participation, you have people government, you have representation. But representation not as the government by an elected elite, but from a self-chosen group that comes up from the bottom of the people. And what republicanism is often contested, and there's never, I don't think anyone has a particular definition of it, but it basically means the rule of the people from the ground, from the bottom up. And it provides, and what the requirement of it is, are what someone like Hannah Arendt would call the spaces of freedom, the places where people could come together and talk. And so this is where Hannah Arendt comes into this, is that she argued that very much basing her insights here on Thomas Jefferson, who was the writer of our Declaration of Independence and one of the leading and the third president of the United States. Jefferson came to believe later in his life, in 1815, 1816, he started writing a number of letters in which he said the great failure of the American Constitution was that it provided a space for politics for the elected representatives, namely the House, the Senate, the Supreme Court, but it didn't provide a space for politics for the everyday people. And he proposed in the 1816, 1817, in a number of letters, that we needed to bring in back what he called a ward system, which was a system in which in groups, the whole country would divide it into wards with no more than 2,000 people in a ward, and in each ward there would be a constitutionally mandated and defended place where people could just come together and talk and debate and think about public issues. That never happened. But I've come to see this movement for citizen assemblies, participatory democracy, however you want to name it, as a way to rethink and resurrect this Republican tradition, this ward system. Who knows what the people come together to talk about will talk about, right? It could be traffic patterns as they have here. It could be immigration. It could be building permits, condominium boards, whatever it is. But a place where people come together to talk. And the point of this is not necessarily, so this is one intervention that I'm interested in, is let's stop talking about, I don't want to stop talking about democracy, but let's understand that in talking about democracy, we're really talking about a Republican tradition of self-rule in which the point is to empower people to develop habits and skills of talking to people who they maybe don't agree with, who aren't themselves, who aren't in their own social circle, but and you build from the bottom up a series of leaders instead of from the top down, not electing. You all know, I assume, that whether it's Aristotle or Montesquieu or Rousseau, democracy is supposed to be incompatible with elections. All of them say so. And the reason is because in an election, you're always going to elect the most educated and the wealthiest and the most established people. And if you want to actually empower the people, you can't use elections. And so the idea of these council governments is that you have small councils, and each one brings someone from the bottom up until you get to a higher, and the people are representing the people, not electoral, not elites from the top down, but the people from the bottom up. And the elitism is not money or education, but is simply political talent. The other, so that's one sort of way I approach this. The other is to think about this as a matter of not reaching outcomes, but teaching people how to be political. So Helen Landemore and Jürgen Habermas and others, and you know, Helen's a good friend and someone I work with a lot, but they have taken the position often that one of the reasons we want to include participatory polling and participatory citizen assemblies is that they'll lead to better decisions, right? Better outcomes. I don't think that's necessarily the case at all. And I think the idea that there's a better or worse outcome, I think, is actually pretty arrogant and elitist. But to me, the argument for these is not outcome related, it's process related. It's that what democracy and politics actually requires is people talking with people they disagree with and learning to compromise, learning what politics is about, which is finding the lowest common denominator that we can agree on and figuring out how to live on that and live according to that. And these ward systems, these town hall meetings were actually spaces where people learned to be political. And in electoral processes, in the electoral government that we have today in much of the West, and certainly in the United States, most people have lost that experience, lost that habit, lost that skill. And I think the citizen assemblies are a way of restoring that skill to people. I'll just add, you know, here, this relates to the question of the juries, right? In the United States, we have something called the jury. And Alexis de Tocqueville said that the jury was the single most important institution in American democracy. Not because the jury will lead to the right outcomes in trials. They often don't. But because the jury teaches average Americans how to come together and talk to each other about right and wrong. And what Tocqueville actually says is it teaches them the spirit of the judge, which I think is a great claim. It teaches them to judge a case not on their own particular feelings, but on a public feeling, a feeling of the judge. And that's what I've come to see the citizen assembly movement to be about. It's about reteaching people the spirit of the public. We live in a time in which polarization is so rampant, everyone wants their own view. And it's very hard. In fact, people, when you say, take a public view, take the view of the res publica, the public thing, people laugh at you. They think you're that you're a naive, joker, right? And they're saying, no, it's all about power. Well, I don't think you can have a political system that's all about power. Here we'll all stand against Max Weber and stand with Plato. In a political system, you need also a sense of the res public, the common good, and the only way to nurture that feeling is to actually have people talk to each other and be in a room where they have to decide, should we have more teachers or more police or more hospitals? And it's in that common talking to each other where we develop this sense of the public. And so that's the ground and that's the framework in which I've come at approaching these issues. There's a lot more to be said, but I'll stop there. And
we'll leave something for the second circle also. Exactly. This was really interesting to say, and especially about learning political. And And the whole system of United States, in a way, what you said in the beginning, there is like in each of these states, you learn, basically you had the right for Republican state. It was Republican state that then joined together to United States of America. And obviously there is a strong central government, but still some powers are on the states, and there is a tension, obviously, which we sometimes we can listen something about. But now when we go to European Union, for example, and Europe as another example of, well, I wouldn't say United States, but let's say something which is maybe getting closer to confederation of the state. There is also the tension how to make the European government, or what is happening on the European level, legitimate for the citizens, and the whole process of conference for the future of Europe was launched actually to include somehow different actors, including the citizens, but also different stakeholders, experts, civil society organizations, etc., etc. And Giovanni has a lot of experience with this. He was observing the process, and maybe you can tell us a little bit more. What are the, how do you see this process from this perspective of deliberation and the effects? And what is the outcome actually? Yeah. Is it a better decision, or is it about the process and getting in touch with European level somehow?
First of all, a biographic note. I'm a person in transit and in a country in transit, in the sense that I have been working for many years about, for example, participatory budgeting, so methodologies where participants self-select themselves. And I'm now starting working, especially in this new project Phoenix, on deliberation for supporting the European Green Deal, which I coordinate around Europe. And I'm moving to an interest also for deliberation with those that Iris Marion Young defined as artificial settings, in the sense that somehow deliberation constructs also a specific setting, which is not the setting of society, and can risk to forget what Iris Marion Young was calling the repertoire of struggles that model the society, beyond the engineering of participation. So in this movement, obviously, there is a story I have about related to my past. So I think that what is very important when you look to participation and to deliberation, to protect those that Graham Smith calls the democratic goods of democracy, and complement somehow the unfulfilled promises of representative democracy that Norberto Bobbio had underlined already in the 90s. For doing that, which are the democratic goods? Just to have an idea, those that Graham Smith lists are inclusiveness, informed judgment, transparency, and popular control. As you can see, they are strictly related one to the other, because transparency and popular control are two faces of the same coin somehow. And I believe that in order to fulfill the unexpressed potentials, which are still a lot, if you look to participatory budgeting, I finished recently a guidance note for the United Nations, and I try to focus on the challenges, not what we had 35 years of history that didn't develop, and even the 30% of the potential of these tools. So the unexpressed potential needs a recognition of limits. Okay, and I think the limits are strictly linked to the focus that each form of participation or deliberation have in trying to bring to surface and defend and protect the democratic goods. For example, let's do an example of structural limits of participatory budgeting. Obviously, you always have conjunctural limits. Conjunctural limits are if you do things bad or wrong, if you do it with a large scope or you do it very narrowly. Okay, these are conjunctural. It doesn't matter. It depends on how you do things. But not relating to the how, do a single tool that can be used in participation, or a meta tool like participatory budgeting is, have limits that you need to face, for example, compensating with another methodology. I think there are at least some very easily. Participatory budgeting is about collecting different ideas which sometimes miss a vision. So they don't help to build a vision of the city, a solidarity city, a modern city, a smart city. Sometimes you don't reflect on the territory. You just put here and there things. The second limit is about the fact that participatory budgeting deals normally with expenditures and not with revenues. But the big difference on what you can do in a territory comes from how you build your revenues, the wealth of a city. And if you don't limit yourself to this small thing that is a budget, because the budget is the public treasure with the money that enters and goes out. But the richness of a city are packed with people for managing things without spending so much money. But all the permission that you give, look here, if you look in front of us, all the compensation of town planning changes, these are things that normally public authorities, they do not want to share with people, no? They do this negotiation alone, as the city shows clearly, no? So the wealth on which we have to do participatory budgeting is all of that. Is not the treasure of the municipality, which sometimes is nothing. Okay, so that is in the sense participatory budgeting could be considered also, something that can be extended to different scales and be reused as a fractal in different environments. Okay, the third limits of participatory budgeting is that its attractiveness is built on competition for resources. Now, you gamify sometimes reality, and the risk of this is recreating majority and minorities, as was saying. I don't think, in the line of what Roger was saying, that participatory and deliberative democracy can be mimetic of representative democracy. That means that they cannot use the same categories. They cannot use winners and losers. They need to create consensus and cooperation. They cannot reuse as main important category representativeness, because diversity is much more important. Otherwise, how could you complement the unfulfilled promises of representative democracy if you imitate it? No? So, in this sense, I think that what interests me in this moment, and what is the center of my new project Phoenix, is especially hybridity, or hybridness, I don't know, not sure, hybridity, and which is a dimension mixing different tools that can somehow focus on democratic goods in a different way. Now, so I think that inclusiveness could be, for example, a very important category for being attached to and having interest for deliberation. Because in the moment you select a public, in the beginning of a citizen assembly, a citizen panel, a citizen jury, you could do operations of how could you call affirmative actions, for example, no? For bringing inside people that normally are underrepresented. But here enter the conjunctural limits. You can also avoid to do it. And coming to the big scale of the conference on the future of Europe, which was, for who does not know, has been a process costed around 20 million euros that the European Union have been sponsoring, and three institutions of the European Union have been sponsoring in the last 8 months. So the Parliament, the Commission, and the Council of the States, of the countries of the European Union, in which 800 citizens has been random selected. I mean, I say like that because they were random selected, but many say no, so they say they indicated a daughter, a boyfriend, and so the citizen originally selected were not the same, and so it obliged to adjust several times the selection, and they were selected on demographic data, so men, women, education, urban, rural, age, and these kind of things. Do we believe that these elements are enough to make a difference of ideas? I don't believe it. Okay, I know people that are women or younger than me, but they think exactly the same. They live in the same environment with the same vision. So possibly in the future, the main issue that have to be reimagined is the selection moment. So adding some element which refer to thinking. The critics that have been done by the majority of the right-wing, far right-wing, so AFD in Germany or Fratelli d'Italia in Italy to this operation was that they were not representative of that part of Europe that does not believe in Europe. Okay? They were more or less those that accepted to come to this process were Europeists or even Euro-enthusiastic in some cases. So where were the Eurosceptical? There were some. I can tell you after 8 months that I follow all these people, there were some. And they have been valued gradually. So in the final statements, they presented the decision saying, some of us were Eurosceptic. I know that this has been marketing by the same citizen, putting in more visibility those people to say, no, we are representative also of these people. There was a lady, an ambassador, one of the 80 ambassadors, was not believing that COVID did not exist and it's a complot by the states to control our lives, okay? And this person was put forward more visible space by the citizens themselves because they could say, hello, we have also this difference. But okay, it was not representative in terms of number because Eurosceptical citizens are much more than 3 or 4 out of 800. So, but this category was not so important for me. I guess that the selection based also some ideas, for example, Eurosceptical or Euro-enthusiastic, could help in the future to improve the legitimacy and the authoritativeness of this kind of space. But I think that the most important things in this process was the exposure to difference, okay? The exposure to difference. So people, I asked to a Polish guy, why the measures that came out are so leftist? And he told me they were not in the beginning. They became. Because as soon as the northern people started to see what the hell was the functioning of a health system in Romania or in Bulgaria, and they started to question the idea of Europe. Europe is a community. So a community cannot have minimum standard to protect its members. So they ask, if you read the 351 proposals, you can see transversally a very cross-cutting idea that is Europe needs a minimum standard for work, for health, for many issues, for a basic income. There are, because their vision is of a Europe of people, not of a Europe of institutions. Okay, so the same as Roger was saying, I think the process is much more important than anything that emerged. Because many of these things emerged also in the previous laboratory guinea pig spaces like Tomorrow's Europe, Europolis. There have been processes that were disconnected from decision making. This process was strictly linked to decision making. And why it was? Because of failure of other processes. So this process learned a lot from the Citizen Convention on Climate of France that created his protected environment for the citizen to decide 150 measures, and when they arrive out with the list of measures, the politician and the parliament mainly closed the door. What happened before? President Macron has offered to, has said, at the end of this process, your measure will be inserted into law. It was a lie, a clear lie, because he's a president and not the parliament. He could not swear that the measure were, he could not promise that. But he motivated people to go there. The problem is that when the measure arrived to the end, the political elite of members of parliament say, who are those that come from nothing and gives their idea? I have been elected, I'm paid, I'm recognized, I have been elected by blah, blah, blah number of people, and we don't want to listen to them. And so another process of 6 to 8 months restarted in order to make the member of parliament aware of the importance of this work, and gradually measures, and not few of them, were inserted in the new environmental law. So, but it was a process on top of the process, because they have forgotten what instead in the Constitutional Convention of Ireland was done since the beginning, mixing people and politicians from the beginning, being careful that people could be in a number larger than the politicians. And so I finished saying, here, I think in the COFO, the most important thing in the process was the organizers, because the three organizers, the so-called mixed commission, never talked to each other, and was visible that the Commission, the Council of States, the Parliament, they never talked really to each other to organize something together. They were working in parallel, sometimes clashing, but in here they have to understood something that is important in the participatory and deliberative process, that you must build the process from the perspective of the recipient and not of the organizer. And so people could not understand why European Union is not an institution and is done by several institutions which are competing among themselves. So they had to join together and try to create an image of a body unique, which is the European Union, that's dialogue with them without fragmenting in all this. And you know, the first thing that people ask to is to change totally the names of all the institutions of the European Union, because it's not understandable what the hell is which institution. So we want to, they function like a state. They ask to a federal something, no? So they want a Senate, that are the Council of Prime Ministers, then they want the Parliament, and the Commission has to be called the Executive Board of European Union. A simple measure, but if you don't start to language, nobody will be able to understand what this institution is communicating. So I think the process was important on the side of the organizer and on the side of participant. The mega question is, if all the changes that happen in the quality of the proposal were a consequence of the exposure to difference of people, the discovery of difference, the friendship among people, and European capital that never disappear possibly from the people, whatever will be the result in political terms, how is possible to extend this to others? Because all the last studies that Andre Bachtinger, even Joel Gastiel published shows that mini public has a very big problem, not on the quality of proposal, but on creating trust, because they are small black boxes somehow, and who's not invited does not believe that
we're going to continue on this. Yes.
Okay.
We're going to continue on this, yes,
later.
on the second round. And thanks a lot for this
Yeah.
input. I think it was really interesting also to start from participatory budgeting. And I will now refer to Stefania to tell us a little bit more about spending the money. Stefania is actually a member of the National Commission for Public Debates in Italy, and she is monitoring the public debates on spending of European money, in a way, of investments and loans which are coming. And it would be really interesting to see now from the perspective one of the states and its citizens, obviously, how they see the process and how they see the spending of this and where it comes from and whatever. Please.
Yes. Okay, thank you very much. I think that I will recall some of the things that you said. First of all, let me say a few words about participatory democratic innovation that is called public debate, so you can know a little bit better what I'm talking about. It's, let's say, a democratic innovation that was introduced in France for the first time in 1992, 1995. And then also it was experimented also in Italy since 2009. And the interesting thing is that both countries moved towards the institutionalization of this kind of process. Because France, but also Italy some years ago, introduced a law that makes public debates compulsory for the, I explain for what. So public debates are, let's say, in a general way, a way to involve local communities when the state decides to build a major public work, like a new highway stretch, a new railway line, a new energy plant, a new waste disposal plant, and so on. Okay? So we know these infrastructures usually raise conflicts and oppositions from the local communities. And France and Italy decided to introduce a law to make these public debates compulsory. That means that when the technicians, the designers, the planners of the major public works arrive at an early stage, not too much early, but at an intermediate stage of planning, they are obliged to open a debate and to open to meet the local communities, to meet people, to discuss the project, to show which are the features of the project, like a new highway, the impact, the social and environmental impacts, and so on. And they are obliged to discuss with the citizens, with stakeholders, with all the local associations, environmental associations, about the features. And they are obliged to talk about two things: the opportunity of the public work, whether is it necessary to build this work or not, and the aspects, all the design aspects of the major public work, like, for example, the potential variations of a railway stretch or something like this. Okay? They have, of course, Italy and France have many similarities in the features of these processes, but I don't have time to go deep into these things. Let me just say that you usually, when you see a public debate, you usually see 4-6 months of meetings in France, a little bit less in Italy, like 2-4 months, except for the new public works now that are financed by the new funds in the European Union, which was really, really fast. And so the ministry decided to switch to squeeze the length of the public debate, making it like a mission impossible. But anyway, so what you usually see is several meetings at the local level where the contractors of a major public work presents a dossier, presents a document with all the features of the project, and also discuss with the citizens about the features and the potential changes that can be done. These processes are not like free spaces. Free spaces are not spontaneous because they are structured. They are designed and structured, and they are led and assisted, conducted by public participation professionals who are used to conduct these citizen and politicians and technicians meetings. Okay. At the end of the process, these let's say coordinators, these professionals have the duty of writing a final report. This report has to contain all the things that have been discussed during the process, and especially it has to highlight the main controversial issues and the main recommendations that come from the citizens. And after that, the contractor, the Ministry of Infrastructure, for example, or organization, the private organization that has to build a new highway, has the duty, is obliged to rewrite a new technical dossier. So to rewrite a new project, a final project, where the contractor will explain, is expected to explain why the institution made specific choices and whether they decided to take into consideration some of the recommendations coming from the citizens. And if not, they have to explain, to argue why. Okay? So, going back to the title of the session, Revitalizing Democracy. I was, when I was preparing my speech, I was thinking how, not only whether public debates have somehow managed to revitalize the democracy in Italy, but first of all, how can we define the term revitalization? In which sense we intend the revitalization of democracy? I think that from my scientific perspective, I'm a policy analyst, we can say that the participatory democratic innovations could somehow revitalize democracy in 4 ways. Okay? So the first one is the main ambition, I think, of these democratic innovations is to make better citizens. Somehow, Roger said at the beginning. Okay, what does it mean? What does it mean? Helping people to increase their interest in public affairs, as Roger said, but also to increase their knowledge and awareness on the complexity of the public problems, of the solutions, of all the constraints of the public administrations. Okay, so I think these are the 2 very big ambitions in terms of making better citizens. And another aim, another revitalizing aim, I think, would be to improve democratic interactions. So these democratic innovations are expected to improve the interactions between policy actors, citizens, politicians, bureaucrats, technicians, and so on. In which way? Now I say something from my really deliberative perspective, which is probably not your. You are moving toward the hybridization, but I feel you are still very participatory in the soul. So I think these democratic innovations are expected to increase the mutual understanding between people with different perspectives, needs, goals, interests, values. So this is another very ambitious aim. And the third, which is again very ambitious, I think, is that there is a third aim, the one to speed up the decisional processes. In some way, I know maybe some of you are not so in line with my viewpoint, but from a policy analyst perspective, speeding up the decisional processes is a good outcome, okay? Especially in Italy, where we spend years and years in discussing without reaching any conclusion. So these democratic in general, democratic innovations are expected to not to lower decisional processes, adding months of discussions, but to speed it up, to speed up the processes, because they can transform conflicts during the decisional process, and so they can reduce cases after the official decisions, and also because somehow they are expected to informally anticipate specific policy issues that can raise up during the implementation phase. like from the authorization organizations, negative administrative advices, and so on. And the fourth aim is to, as Roger said before, and you also, to make better decisions. Okay, I think this is one of the, I know probably Roger does not agree with this, but it's one of the aims, at least in the public debates, in the scientific debate. Can we manage to improve public decisions, public policies through these democratic innovations? And the way, I think the way in which democratic innovations are expected to reach this outcome is to reduce the negative externalities of the public decisions and to correct design mistakes, okay, which are usual. I mean, very often it happens that, for example, the designers and planners of a major public work, of an infrastructure, make mistakes. We are human beings, okay? So my question was, in light of the public debates that have taken place in Italy over the last years, can we say that public debates really managed to somehow reach these 4 goals? Do I have some minutes more to say something, or you prefer? Okay. Okay, lights and shadows, I would say. We haven't had many public debates in Italy for now. France has experienced hundreds of public debates. But unfortunately, not so much. I mean, my colleagues in France have not written so much about the outcomes, the impact of public debates in France. So I mean, what I'm saying now is just not from a scientific perspective, but from the first impression from the National Commission monitoring activity. Okay. I don't think that any scientist will ever be able to establish whether citizens who take part to democratic innovations really increase their interest in public affairs, their knowledge on public issues, because there are so many factors that can affect this. But what we know for sure, at least in the public debates in Italy, is that the willingness to participate is really low. And in general, it's basically largely unbalanced in favor of the people, of course, of the people who perceive, who feel to bear a very high cost from the construction of a new infrastructure. So we know that the more intense is your interest in something or the opposition against something, the stronger the individual resistance to knowledge, to awareness, to new information. So I think this is a really problematic node in democratic innovations. Do we really manage to increase knowledge and awareness? I see very strong resistance from the cognitive perspective of the people who feel afraid. A new highway stretch, I have to lose my house, my home. I don't listen to all the things that the technicians say about the goodness of the infrastructure. I'm simplifying that. What about the democratic interactions? In this sense, I'm very much more positive. I think that the public debates, if they have time to work properly, and they are not really squeezed in like 2 or 3 meetings, but if they have time to be planned, designed, and to work properly, I think that some clues of conflict transformation and mutual understanding really emerge. I think in particular on 2 clues. The one is that the final dossiers of the contractors, of the promoters of the major public works are almost always different from the original one. they change. They change something, and the technicians usually include aspects that were previously neglected, like some social aspects or some more defined and precise environmental aspects and so on, or variations also about the project. In Italy, we are not at the time to establish whether some contractors really abandoned the projects, but in France we have clues also about this. And I also saw, because I made, from my scientific perspective, from the National Commission, I made participatory observation to all the meetings, which was really, really a tough way, but this was the only way I really could feel what was happening. And I think the ways in which technicians and citizens communicated with one another changed progressively along as the meetings went on. Okay, many times I saw the language of technicians becoming more comprehensible, more detailed, more open to people who are not really expert of anything about infrastructures. And at the same time, I also saw citizens or people from environmental association or so on, changing their languages and their approach, being less generic, less principle-led, and posing more and more sharp remarks, okay, on specific aspects, on micro-design, and this really could make the difference because they were reaching somehow the language of the technicians, okay, challenging the technicians exactly on specific aspects of the infrastructures. About the decisional processes, again, now I have some doubts about the real capacity of the public debates to anticipate, to informally anticipate specific technical or administrative issues during the public debate. Why? Because the public administrations, the bureaucrats who are involved, who are called to take part and to say something informally, like, for example, you are discussing about this variation, but remember that when I will have to give an authorization in 6 months, I will probably look at this law, these laws, and these laws say it's very difficult to obtain an authorization on this idea, okay, because the European Union asks us to do specific things and so on. So something like this is really difficult to be obtained by public administrations, by the bureaucrats, by the technicians, not only because they do not have enough information at that stage, but because they do not have a culture of informality. They don't feel comfortable. They are afraid of informality. If I say something, it becomes official. No, it's an informal meeting. Just let us know whether, if we go in this direction, we will find some probable obstacles in the administrative procedures. They are not really used to do this, to keep this approach, this informal approach. And
can we now bring?
Yes. In conclusion, I think about the improvement of public decisions. Yes, citizens who participate in public debates, although all the irrational or not well expressed opinions, in the end, they help improve the projects, because they find some small mistakes, they expose some aspects that were neglected at the beginning, but we must know that in this way, the major public works, the infrastructures are more expensive. Mm-hmm. Usually, the technicians consider much more the economic aspects, the efficiency aspects, and citizens increase all the social and environmental issues, and so the infrastructures usually raise the costs. Mm-hmm. Right?
Well, thanks a lot for this intro. It took a little bit longer than I planned and expected, but I think it was really valuable to hear it, so it's perfectly fine. But since we have, let's say, 35 minutes or something like that, 40 minutes for the next session, I would, before giving the floor again to you, I think I would open the floor for the questions, and then we are going to continue with this. So I see one hand here, 2 hands, so please go ahead. We just need the mic for, you can take this one from here. We need the mic because of those who are listening online, sorry. Yeah. So please, Janina.
Yeah, I'm Janina Well from the Albert Hirschman Center on Democracy. First of all, thanks for the 3 reflections. Very, very interesting. And I would like to add some points also for the discussion. The first is related to the diagnosis. I think it's quite problematic because quite often it seems that the lack of participation is the problem of democracies nowadays. And I wonder, what's the problem for whom? Because if you ask the people, what we know is that people is not looking forward more participation, asking for more participation. Yesterday, this was in discussion also in the panel. So the problem is bad governance, the problem is public services, inequality, corruption, and for scholars and activists, the problem is the lack of participation. And I think this creates an extra problem which goes in the direction of what Giovanni described. Then the political institutions take it as the real problem, the lack of participation, and promote symbolic ways of participating without clear rules, without clear impact. And I would like to reflect a bit more from our side on how we are contributing to increase the problem in place of looking for a solution. Then a second point, quite quickly, is related to sorted assemblies and to the discussion on the better or worse outcomes. I think above all, to think on sorted assemblies with binding powers would be above all undemocratic, even before thinking on if it's true or false that are taking better decisions, is undemocratic, because who is decided that sorted assemblies are better? I think are a good solution, but not for taking binding decisions, and it needs much more reflection too, because this goes in the direction of what Christine Lafont defines as plutocracy, which would be problematic. It's not democratic anymore if someone decides that citizens' assemblies sorted are to have binding powers. Then transparency and control. I think this is also a problem we have nowadays. We have much more information, so people is more aware about corruption, bad decisions, etc., but we do not have more control. And I'm not asking for going back and have less information, but to think exactly on how to develop better the whole spectrum, because we do have more information, but not more control. And at the end, we have more distrust because of this information. And then I think democracy clearly does not exist without political participation, but political participation doesn't make a system democratic. And we should remember that also. because, I mean, it's clear that this is a point, and all this confusion on participatory institutions without thinking carefully how and which institutions and et cetera, could create further problems again. And finally, I agree with Giovanni on the importance of thinking, well, you call that hybridity. Some people speak about systemic participatory turn or participatory ecologies. I think this is a very fertile ground to reflect and develop ideas on this direction. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Mladen?
Hello, my name is Mladen Ostojic, and I'd like to reflect a bit on the structural limits suggested by Giovanni. So I have a question for Roger regarding the role of expertise in decision-making in popular assemblies or wards or town halls. How can popular will expressed through participatory forms of decision-making be reconciled with expertise? And for Stefania, you mentioned that there was a very low interest on the part of the population to participate in the public debates. Do you think there is a role for political parties and civil society organizations in promoting citizen participation in these forums? Thank you.
And one more here, then I'm going to return here.
Ana Matan, Faculty of Political Science in Zagreb. For Roger, the question is, what is politics? And is it possible to connect the idea of politics that you mentioned, politics as doing something about the public good, and the idea of politics as a struggle for power? Are we in a situation to be able to work only with one or the other concept of politics, or there is a possibility to connect? Let me.
Thank you. Let's start with Roger. There were a few of them directly.
There's some great questions. As I try and answer them, I'm also going to respond a little bit to Giovanni and Stefania. Let me start maybe with the last question from Anna about what is politics, because I think it goes to the root of things. We all right? Yeah.
It's better photo shoot without.
It's all for the photo shoot. I think you framed it really well. You know, I teach a course on what is politics, and you know, I start with Weber and Plato. Right? Is politics about power, or is politics about ideas? And I think it's both. And the interesting thinker on the thinkers on this that I find really amazing are people like Montesquieu and John Adams, and then Hannah Arendt. And what all three of them say is that the only way to preserve political freedom and politics is to understand that politics is about power, but it has to, but that the only way to prevent one power from taking power, from centralization, is to expand the number of sources of power in society as greatly as possible. And so the way this gets framed in this debate is the question of federalism, which hasn't really been mentioned much, but has come up, I think Gazzella and others just briefly mentioned it. But from Arendt's point of view, I said before that the American Constitution was a Republican Constitution, not a Democratic one. And that's shorthand. When I teach a course on this, I make my students understand that the American Constitution is a federal, Republican, constitutional government with democratic representational elements. It's complicated. But the federalist aspect is important because it's not just that we have separation of powers at the national level between the executive, administrative, and judiciary. We also have states, we have counties, we have local governments, we have non-governmental organizations. And what the idea here is that the only way to preserve power without it becoming centralized and one interest ruling over all the others is to expand and diversify the number of power sources so that they all can test each other. And that's the beauty of federalism as an idea, not often as it's practiced in practice, because in federalism in practice simply means a central government and a bunch of states. You actually need hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of different power structures, so that if the central government and the states make bad decisions, the counties and the local governments can resist. And they have to resist from a position of power. And this comes to something, Giovanni, you said, right? Which is, we often think of power in this participatory structure as simply how to spend, expenditures. And this has been the biggest problem in the United States in the last 60 years, as far as I'm concerned. Over and again, local governments, so town governments, county governments, we have the power to resist the states. We have the power to resist the federal government, but we have largely given it up. And the main reason we've given it up is we've cut out our tax base. We've stopped producing revenues on a local level. Why? Because we want to lower our taxes. And because we want to lower our taxes, we take more and more of our money from the state and federal governments, which tax people. And as a result, well, it's sort of obvious. The power's where the money is. If we're going to get the money from the state and federal governments, we have to do things their way. And we lose our power. And so I think you're absolutely right that revenue, power generation, is necessary on a local level if you're going to preserve a kind of federated power structure that we talk about. And so that's one aspect of this question. But the other that I was talking about is that you need to create an idea of what politics is about. And while it is about power, and you're not going to get people to participate if there's not interests involved, if there's not power at stake, part of what participating in politics should help to nurture and create is this sense that while it is about interests, and I am pursuing my interests, I create sympathies, I create understandings of other people, and we try and build a common world. We try and build a common idea, this res publica, this public spirit. And part of that has to be developed in the process. It's not something that comes from the top down. You can't simply elect people. It has to come from people actually enjoying the process of arguing and debating. And there's a famous line, again, I'm going to quote Thomas Jefferson again, and I'm sorry I'm bringing the American perspective into your European world, but Thomas Jefferson writes to John Adams, and you have to understand that John Adams and Thomas Jefferson were the greatest political opponents of their age. They were fundamentally at odds on almost every issue, hated each other politically. And Thomas Jefferson writes to John Adams at the end of his life, "I hope to see you, my friend, in heaven in the great congressional debating hall." And what this means is that for Jefferson, as much as he hated Adams, he loved talking to him. He loved debating with him. And that process of debating didn't come because someone told them to do it. It didn't come from a theory. It came from the experience, what Hannah Arendt calls the experience of politics. And that's what's, I think, so far missing in so much of our modern politics. And this will allow me to talk a little bit about this other question on expertise. Expertise is a complicated question. I'm writing a book on it right now. So I have a lot to say about it. I don't think experts know very much. Philip Tetlock. For sure. Well, and sociologists and political theorists too. Philip Tetlock has a wonderful, I don't know if any of you know him, but he's He's a political scientist at University of Pennsylvania, and he has done a number of these studies in which he takes the top experts from the CIA and MIT and Caltech and Harvard, and he has them make predictions about their expertise. And then he'll bring in 100 citizens with no expertise, or 10 or 15 in groups, and have them work together to make distinctions. The results of the studies are classified by the federal government. And they're classified because the experts perform so badly and are beaten by the everyday citizens so roundly that they're embarrassed to publish the numbers. And they won't do it because they think it's against the national security. But the point is, the experts don't know very much. That doesn't mean the experts don't have knowledge. They do. So the way I put it is this. Experts are important. We should listen to experts because they have certain things they know. But what Tetlock argues, and I think he's right about this, is that experts get caught up by their expertise. Do you all know the hedgehog versus the fox analogy? So foxes sniff around and know lots of things and sort of are curious. Hedgehogs dig deep and know one thing. Experts are like hedgehogs. They get to know one thing. And they fool themselves to thinking because they know one thing, they know it and they understand it. But it's the 10 or 20 or 50 people, the foxes, that often make better predictions than the experts because they know what they don't know and they seek out the answers. And so Tetlock says experts, are too much like hedgehogs. Experts are important. You need them. You need to ask them questions. You need to learn from them. But experts should not govern. And so Hannah Arendt, in one of her essays near the end of her life, says the greatest danger to modern political democracy is governance by experts and the entrance of college-educated elites into government. And I happen to agree with her. That doesn't mean college-educated elites aren't important. You should talk to them. You should learn from them. But they should not have any more responsibility for making decisions than anyone else. And we need to understand that experts disagree. I mean, one of the chapters of the book is about expert testimony in cases, in legal cases. And one of the amazing things is, no matter what the issue it is, there's never just one side of expertise. There's always multiple sides of expertise. And people today think, oh, well, experts tell us this. That's just not true. There is even climate change where people want to say, oh, 99, it's not true. The experts wildly disagree on climate change. They think there's something changing, but how and why and what that means, enormous disagreement. And so, and how to change it, enormous disagreement. So I think the retreat to experts and the fetishization of experts, especially by many in the liberal elite, is a great danger, and one that we and so this goes to the question of, is there a truth in politics? Is there a right answer? I do believe there's better and worse answers, but I don't think the better answers are true, and I don't think the worse answers are wrong. I think we build a world, we build a common world, we build a public by talking to each other. And the better answers are the one that most people agree on after informed, thoughtful deliberation and debate, not just instinctual anger. So there's obviously more to say, but I'll let others.
Now you have.
No. I had no specific question on me, but I would like to react to something that emerged in the debate and in Janina's reflection. Building on the conference on the future of Europe again, so this large scale, that means a larger complexity and more difficult relation with the complex institution. First of all, I was saying before when I finished the first part of my speech that the big investments served a lot the person that we are there. It's true that served a lot the workers that organized the process. They learned a lot and they could trickle down somehow in the future events. So this enlarged the benefits, but then they didn't influence a lot. This process did produce a lot of personal transformation, and this personal transformation is not possible to contaminate to the others that were not part of the process. So it remains an elite, a democratic elitarism exercise, unfortunately. That's the problem, the limit that many of the deliberative process have, unfortunately. They reach some of the important goals that Stefania was saying, but the problem is how a process of 12 or 25 or of 800 persons in a continent of 500 millions is able to create better citizens. So the problem is always how to extend this to a larger audience. The COFOE tried to create a platform, but the platform was not a very symmetrical tool in terms of, it was very intransparent. Nobody created rules to know how the things emerged in the platform had to be, so there were 43,000 suggestions. There were not many in 500,000 among 500 million of Europeans, but in any case, how to analyze them. There were no rules for the 800 to analyze what was coming from the 43,000 contributors. And that is a limit that in hybrid institutions that mix a larger moment to smaller moment has to be faced. There have been an article very interesting of Nenad Stojanovic recently that analyzed, especially in Switzerland, the relation between this random selected assemblies and referendum, where they can be located. These assemblies can be located before to create the information, as is in the Citizen Initiative Review, or they can put in the end. So you have different geometries of relation between the small moment and the enlargements. And that is a very important analysis that still have to be done somehow. Where do you put them in order to improve, increase, maximize the effect? The second thing is about representativeness. There was an interesting book of Martina, I don't remember, is in our group, it's from the University of Trento, I don't remember the surname. In 2020, she published a study analyzing how the federalism of states related with participation, and she discovered that the more countries have already a number of sources of power in act, so pro-federalist or tendentially federalist country, the more they accept and improve and empower participation. And that is very important, but the source of power can be competitive among them. In the conference on the Council of Europe, it was very clear that the organized civil society was viewed by the majority of random selected citizens as an enemy, not as an ally, because they were felt as another elite that has in Brussels or in Strasbourg their second home, so they are seen as lobbyists and not as accumulator of knowledge, not as advocate of others, but as self-perpetuating groups that suck public money in order to survive and having their second home in the European Parliament. So this is a problem we have to face. The majority of citizens, the more and more citizens think that any intermediation in society is part of the elite, and so they refuse them. And that clash was very, very visible, and there were no rules to face them. So civil society was protesting that they do an enormous job and they were not taken into account, and that this 800 random were just taken seriously while they were not, and they were always there and they could give continuity for the future, but they were ignored. And the 800 continued to say, stay far because you are the elite like all the others there. Okay, so finally, the issue of informed judgment and the language. The question could be, in the Conference on the Country of Europe, was protected to a certain extent the capacity of doing informed judgment by the citizens? And I would say no, because there was not a real capacity of relating with knowledge, expert knowledge. No? And when they were experts, they were nudging, trying to direct in some direction, and they were not conflictual. One thing of expertise is important to have two experts saying opposite thing on the same issue, in order that citizens can develop this idea of tensions between truth and hypotheses in many cases, as you were saying about climate change. But this was not done, and it was not done because the organizing institution did not have an idea pre-done on all the issues that were under discussion. So they could not accept an expertise that was saying something that this institution has not approved as it's true. And so, again, the problem, we still have as a university, we can do a lot in randomized selection, but in analyzing expert groups and the effect they have on people, what type of disposition to expertise maximize the self-learning and minimize the nudging, because that is important to make good citizens. And finally, this issue of the language that I think was very important. Stefania talked about simplification. I would like to talk about betrayal. When you hypersimplified or oversimplified the language in order to make things understandable to simple people, then you have to come back to a product which is institutional. You have to recomplexify the language after the discussion. The gatekeeper who does that can betray a lot of the discussion. So you need the discussant can have a language which is complex enough to enter in the law without having a translation. And that is very important. So you can use theater to make, I have participated in a process in Belo Horizonte in which a group of the theater audio presence was teaching to people the language of town planning. So they were doing games about bad words. For example, put the plan urbano do transito, it's similar to puta, prostitutes. And so they were laughing a lot on this, and people were learning the language. And so they were using puts, finally, because remember in puta, but that means that in the end of the process, people was doing proposal using already the complex language. And that is very important. That is important. It can be a space in the middle to relate and grow together experts. With this issue of representation, two logic, the characteristic, unlike to all the other process done at European level, this process exposed people to politicians for 4 months. Not people, ambassadors. That means 80 persons out of 800 were the ambassador translating what people had said in the 6 months before to politicians and dialogue and negotiating with them. What was the problem here? The politician had not any imperative mandate. They can interpret their constituency as they want. These people here, the ambassadors, called ambassadors, the term is also symbolic somehow, only could report what the 800 had said in the 6 months before to the politician and put it as it was. They could not change. So they wasted 4 months of learning without being able to change anything of the previous discussion, because they had an imperative mandate, which is introducing these things inside the final documents, and not interpreting, growing, mediating, negotiating. These two logics of representativeness, one against the other, are completely asymmetric. Politicians were powerful in this negotiation, and citizens were in a cage without being able to grow, and very frustrated because they grew, but they couldn't put their growth into the documents. So I think we have to reflect that these dynamics put together can be very dangerous in creative spaces that do not create confidence in the participatory process, because their asymmetries and their imbalances are perceived as another limit that the representative democracy created in order to castrate the capacity of citizens to empower themselves and emancipate themselves through the process.
Thank you. And Stefania, there were several questions for you, so
just a few words about the question whether parties and politicians can have a role in stimulating participation. Yes, of course, they have a role, because they, as far as I see in the Italian context, they usually have a role. They stimulate participation, they mediate between citizens and public authorities, but I also see a typical dynamic, which is, I mean, it's probably normal because of their nature, the nature of the parties, of the politicians. They have to compete for visibility and consensus. So they contribute to stimulate participation, but they really use public debates instrumentally for their own, usually for their own visibility and consensus aims, which is normal. I don't know whether this is properly a counterproductive dynamics. It's simply something that happens really often, in my opinion. And just to conclude, to say just a few words, I disagree almost about everything you said, just to end with conflict and no, I'm exaggerating, but a little bit. No, about the yeah, okay, random sampling, which is so ugly for you, and I recognize, because I also published some articles about the difficulties and the problems of the social legitimation of very, I wouldn't say not democratic, but very strange tools to select citizens, to select participants. So I recognize they have this problem. But I think you are applying the wrong approach to the participatory democratic innovations. I think that these are really delicate processes, and they have to be tailored on the context. So sometimes public participation professionals decide to use random sampling because they think that for example, in front of a context where they expect a highly unbalanced arena of participants who probably will be very much against an issue or a policy, and they want to have not to have a representative sample of 25 people. Of course, it's not representative, but they try to use tools. So these are tools, just tools. It's not democracy. It's just a tool to increase what? The quality of the decisional processes. Random sampling can be a tool sometimes to get people who usually don't speak because they don't shout, they are not aggressive, they are not well organized in committees or organizations or associations. Sometimes random sampling is not useful, but sometimes it's useful because you really get some people who are not really used, who are not so much against a decision or an issue and can contribute to what? To complexify and to make different perspectives confront each other. So just to finish, if democracy is not simply vote, because we know democracy is not simply vote.
We cannot continue because we are already 15 minutes.
It's not to say that random sampling
I'm not against random selection. I'm against random selection.
Okay, we're having
only alone. If it's alone,
we're having multiple lines of communication here, and I would really love to continue.
I just wanted to give some thoughts.
I really
in order that while eating we can fight in the middle and launch food against the others.
Food is there. Food is realistic very much. But before I end, just one more thing. Within Open Society University Network, Hannah Arendt Center is running the website, which is named sortition.academy. So this is the resource website for all those who want to teach someone about sortitions, citizen assemblies, and different tools or models or I don't know how to name them, of participatory democratic innovation. So there is a lot of material you can find here.
You just scroll down on that a little bit. You'll see a little bit more. You scroll down the page.
And you can also contribute if you want. I want just to, if you want to say a few words on this before I...
Yeah, so, I mean, this is a website that we're making widely available, and it's still in process. But over time, it's going to be used. I'm going to be teaching a class on it this year for the Open Society, and we have lectures from a lot of the leading, many of the leading, see Irena and Katsela and others, and here, people talking about use of revitalized democracy, sortition, citizen assemblies, participatory budgeting, etc. There's also a conference that we held last year on it, which you can watch the whole of. But those up above the lectures, there's 7 to 10 minute lectures that you can use in your classes, and they're available widely. Those that you just passed. Videos. So these are all lectures on sortition and different aspects of democracy that are available and open source, and you can use them. So we'll keep adding to it, and I'm hoping that over the years we'll have dozens and dozens of these, but they're done by a professional videographer who works at Columbia University in New York, and they're pretty high quality, I hope. So it's just a resource I wanted to let you know about.
May I do a small announcement on the event which we organize with NOCA, the Knowledge Network on Climate Assemblies, is 6th and 7th of September in Oxford, and will be about the role of politicians in citizen assembly. So where to locate politicians during the process or after the process. Will be a confrontation between models in order to understand which model are more effective in bringing to a policy impact those type of assemblies.
Well, that's a great intro. What I wanted to say, basically we saw during this discussion, and we are going to see probably during the whole 3 days, that this is very much work in progress, and then there are conflicting attitudes, and there are multiple tools that we can think of, and the question we are all interested in is actually design of our states and design of our societies, because we are actually attempting to bring something into already existing design, which is representative democracy in most of the cases which we discussed here, how to implement something, how to change the existing design in order to not on now there is also discussion between make it more participatory, make it more assuring good life for citizens. So if citizens are satisfied with their lives, I guess they are not going to participate that much, because usually in those countries where there is a high level of satisfaction, the participation is around 10, 12, 15%, which is normal in very specific way of that word. But basically we are trying and attempting here also, it's very important for us that we have you here. It's a building community of those who are in a way experts, but still I hope aware of their limits, and aware of that they act only as assistants to the citizens that should bring better decisions, if it's possible to bring better decisions in a way. So thank you very much for being today with this panel.